right, good morning, Alta Realty Group agents. This is Kevin Lauren, I'm the Director of Training and Marketing here, and today we are pleased to be joined by Lauren Noack. And let me see if I can bring Lauren on the line with us. Lauren, how you
Hello.
doing? Good morning.
I'm good.
All right, great to have you back. Lauren is, of course, our transaction coordinator extraordinaire. And she's been helping a lot of the agents, and everybody's very, very happy with her.
I'm glad to hear that, and I'm glad to be a part of the awesome group you guys have here.
Oh, that's great. So before Lauren gets into her presentation, I'm going to bring Cameron Alley from Clearview Mortgage on the line, and Cameron's going to give us a little update on what's happening in mortgage land. How you doing today, Cameron?
I'm doing good, Kevin. Happy Wednesday, everybody.
Absolutely.
So I'll just do a quick update, keep it short and sweet, since I know Lauren's there with some important information. So this, as of right now, there was a Fed meeting yesterday with some pretty good news, basically saying that they're not going to raise rates through 2021. So it was a really highly anticipated meeting, and the 10-year Treasury obviously reacted to that really positively. We're sitting at 1.485, which is lower than last week. Obviously, I don't think you guys are going to remember where the Treasury's at every week, but basically,
that's why we need you, Cameron.
really, really thinking that rates are going to stay right around where they are, or possibly even improve. Which means obviously more people are still going to qualify for these higher values and higher purchase prices that we have right now, which these lower rates are definitely helping, keeping a lot of people in the fight. Also, too, another thing that's really hot right now is cash outs, obviously, since property values have gone up so much. So one thing I'd like to point out, if you have a client who maybe has an offer that's a little less competitive as far as down payment and everything, it's a really good time if they own another property to maybe look at taking out some of that equity. If they're looking to buy a new primary, do a quick refi, get that cash so they can have, maybe a 20% down payment rather than a 5%, maybe make that offer more attractive. And those cash outs right now, a lot of them, we're getting waivers. We can, have cash in hand within 2 weeks sometimes. So if you have any scenarios like that, obviously always feel free to reach out to us so that we can try and help you, get your clients to the best position to get their offer accepted and take advantage of the low interest rates. And then one last thing, obviously, cross qualifications, we're always looking to help you guys with those. Those can be really powerful, especially when you have a lender that may drag their feet, like a big bank, or maybe like a big retail lender, and sometimes they take quite a bit longer to close. So if you're feeling that, or maybe if your client isn't satisfied with their lender, send us for a cross qual. We can obviously make sure that they qualify, but also make sure that that all the information that you need as far as submitting the file clean enough that it would close quickly. And then, maybe just provide a non-invasive way to maybe get them over here so that they can get better pricing, because almost every single product that we have is more competitive pricing than most lenders out there. There's only really a couple things that maybe we aren't as competitive on, and we can always switch our comp to make sure that we're matching them or beating them, and make sure you guys have access to the best turn times and the best service for your clients. So that's pretty much all I have today, unless you have anything to add, Kevin, and I'll let Lauren get it to it.
Yeah, no, that's perfect, Cameron. Really appreciate that. And, it's just, the Clearview Mortgage team has put together such a great platform for each and every kind of loan now. So we're really, really competitive, and not only competitive, the team is just, really, really into getting things done quickly, efficiently, and working with you guys. So a lot of good things to be had by joining Clearview Mortgage and using their services for sure. So perfect, Cameron. Thank you very much. And Lauren.
Yeah, thanks for everyone's time as always.
Yeah, for sure. So don't hesitate to contact Cameron or any of our Clearview Mortgage reps. So let's see, Lauren, I think you should be able to share your screen if I don't share my screen.
Perfect. Okay, here. Oh,
And,
it says.
here you go. There you go.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Can everybody see the Carorg screen here?
Absolutely, looking great.
So a couple things. Mostly today, I just kind of wanted to pick up where we left off last time in the purchase agreement. But before I do that, I did just want to remind everybody that next week is sort of a mini holiday in the TC world, but it's when CAR releases their new and updated forms. They have webinars on it. They have, all this kind of information. But if you want to do a quick overview and see what's coming out, what they look like, what to expect, you can always go to your car.org, transaction center, standard forms, form revisions and new form releases. And this is going to give you that quick summary of what's coming out next week. It will give you the examples of the actual documents, so you can click on them and view them and view the changes. And then you're also able to access this quick summary guide, which will give you that information as well. Basically lets you know what they've done to each form. And a note that they do clarify it is not okay to use the prior version. Obviously, those forms are new, but these forms that they're updating, the lease listing agreement, the residential listing agreement, these forms, you cannot use the previous version. So it shouldn't be an issue because CAR should automatically, or Zip Forms automatically updates the forms, but just keep an eye out and note that. The other thing that I wanted to point out relates back to the listing or the purchase agreement, because it's the slight change that they made to the listing agreement. And that was on July 1st, the additional laws for the defensible space and fire hardening, those become active. And so they've updated, most of these form updates are to reflect that change. But in order to know that the property is in that zone, typically you need to find that information on the NHD report. And so they've added a section in the listing agreement where there's typically a spot. Let's see if I can find it down here. Everything that's in red is what's new, and blue is what's been changed. So this section E here, where the section has always been in here where the seller can authorize ordering of reports while it's a listing. And so they've added the option for the NHD report. And I mention that because when you're in the negotiations in your purchase agreement, it's important, if you already have the NHD company, you already have that report ordered, just a reminder to make sure that you counter or provide the information to the buyer, or otherwise you're going to have two different reports. And that also comes into play with the home warranty as well. If you have a seller home warranty, make sure that you counter that out in the purchase agreement so that they're the same, because that's one of the most common things that we see is that we prep the files during the listing. We, as the TC Advantage, we open title and we order the NHD report, and we order a seller home warranty if needed. We get all of this stuff done up in advance. We take the NHD signature page and have the seller sign it as part of the disclosure package. And then we get an accepted contract and see that the NHD company is a different company, the home warranty is a different company. Then we have to cancel the other orders and reorder. It's just, it's really, more for the TC sanity, but also you just don't want to have a bunch of reports floating around. So just keep that in mind. It's also a good practice to make sure that your seller signs off on these reports that are getting ordered in advance. So having said that, I will jump back into the purchase agreement, and a lot of the things that we notice, agents and common issues that pop up in the listing or the purchase agreement. Let's see. So I think, obviously a big bulk of all of the terms and the elements of the contract are up front in the transaction. And I don't exactly remember where we left off last time, but I do believe it was in the area of the negotiating for the reports and all of the inspections and things like that. So I apologize if I kind of double up from the last time, or for those that weren't there, this will be great for catch up. So one of the things that I do want to point out is that this allocation of costs section just talks about who is going to pay for the inspection, for the report, for the certificate. It does not talk about who is paying for the work. So what I see a lot is that we'll receive offers where it says seller is to pay for the report, and then it will say termite and clearance. And so the issue with that is that you want to make sure that those are separate. They're two separate items for negotiation. And so in this section, the proper way to do the termite report would to note here that the following report: wood pest inspection, termite inspection, however you want to clarify that. And then going down to the other costs section, here is where you can then say who will pay for any work. And so I think that that's something that we see a lot. And so that really is the proper way to do that. The other thing to note, as far as the home warranty goes, I think I did touch on this last time, but the home warranty section here is not a blank check. It's very specific for the agreement of coverage and the amount that coverage will be for. So a lot of times what we'll see is, you have your cost in here for not to exceed, and then they check maybe upgrade, and then we'll get a home warranty confirmation or invoice that is for everything in the kitchen sink that will fall under that limit. But reading the contract, it really clarifies that buyer or seller will pay for the cost not to exceed, we'll say $500 of either a standard or an upgraded 1-year home warranty plan issued by whomever, with the following optional coverages. And so if these coverages are not selected, then they've not been agreed to be covered. So it's really important that you get as specific as possible. One of the best ways too is just to say other and say buyer's choice of coverage. And that way, that kind of gives you that extra buffer for any of those items. Another thing that I see a lot is that they'll call out home warranty coverage here, and then we'll go down a couple ways and see that, all refrigerators and washer dryers are covered, but they didn't select to cover any. They'll just say, upgraded with air conditioning. And then there's no coverage for any additional refrigeration or appliances that are included with the property. So make sure that those two sections line up, and that the client is properly covered for those instances. Not to throw too much confusion into it, but the new purchase agreement that's coming out in December, the default will be that this is all buyer's choice. So it will eliminate some of this back and forth and confusion. But until then, this is something that is important to keep an eye out for. The next thing that I wanted to point out is another item that I see done incorrectly very often, and that involves possession. And it's very important that possession is defined properly and that both sides are protected properly, because anything that is 30 days of seller possession or on, it becomes a landlord-tenant situation. And so you have a whole different set of rules and laws and requirements that apply to that. And so anything that is 29 days or less, you can use the one-page seller in possession form. And so what I see a lot is an agreement for possession is 30 days from close of escrow, here's the SIP form. And it's really important that everybody understands it should be for 30 days or more. And again, because it changes the type of possession and agreement between buyer and seller. Any questions so far? I don't. Let's see. I see a question from Marcella about the PED form. You no longer need the PED forms or the PED all. I've seen, you know, I think we would want specific clarification from broker, but car requirements, the PED form is no longer required. So yay for that, because those were quite the headache. So I'm hoping that those stay away for some time. Okay, so moving on, the other element that I see a lot in the contracts has to do with the contingency timeframes for inspection. And it's something important to keep in mind for these investigations, and especially during this crazy market where buyers are shortening those timeframes so significantly. You end up getting in this sort of timeline loop and a little bit of ambiguity. I see a lot where buyer will shrink their inspection contingency timeframe to 7 days. And then my recommendation or best practice is to make the seller shorten their timeframes as well. Because otherwise what happens is now the seller is obligated, they still have their 7 days for default to provide all the disclosures, reports, information, all of that stuff. And you get in this sort of infinite loop or back and forth, because even though the seller has 7 days to deliver, they could deliver on day 7. However, the buyer gets 5 days after receipt of those disclosures to review them and remove the applicable contingency. So even though the buyer's contingency is 7 days, if the seller delivers all of these items on day 7, your buyer now gets an additional 5 days to review or cancel. So if the buyer really wants to be competitive, you know, you can sort of leave it at that and not, and hope that it doesn't get countered out. But if this is your listing, you want to make sure that these timeframes are realistic. If you already have all the disclosures and reports done, great, it's not an issue. You can deliver them early, but keep that in mind, because the buyer does have the option of an additional 5 days after delivery for that contingency removal. So we see that a lot, and then it's kind of hard to track, because then it changes all of those timeframes and they really don't end up meaning anything. A couple of other things that's always important is confirming how your client is going to take title. Obviously, when you're taking the listing, you verify title and sort of a thing, and that's its own beast of confirming that who's on the listing agreement is the correct name for the seller. But a lot of times we get into these transactions and we're 10 days from closing, and the buyer will say, actually, I want to put it into my trust. And so from the escrow standpoint, that's a really easy change. However, from the transaction standpoint, it involves a whole other set of documents. And especially if you have an individual making a purchase and then it goes into a trust, but there's 2 trustees or something like that. You want to remember that the seller has to approve any changes in who's purchasing the agreement. And so that comes into play in section 26. And it's technically an assignment, because the buyer is now assigning this purchase to the trust as that entity. And it needs to go through an additional seller approval using that AOAA form. And you're also going to need all of those supporting documents as well. So it's just really helpful to kind of clarify with your client in advance. Are you taking this, in your living trust? Are you going to form an LLC? really get that clarification up front before you start, writing offers with them as an individual. Make sure that you have that conversation and understand, what those steps are. The other thing has to do with the contingency or the counteroffer, and it has to do with the section that requires these initials, right? So liquidated damages and arbitration. These are the page where the initials are missed most often and kind of skipped over, but they're such important terms to the contract that they have been given their own sections to initial and acknowledge. And so what most people don't realize, and I'll pull up the counteroffer, is that the counteroffer states that if these sections that require initials are not completed, then they're not a part of the offer. So it's section 1A in the counteroffer. Paragraphs that require initials by all parties but are not initialed by all parties are excluded from the final agreement unless specifically referenced in this counteroffer or in this addendum. So why this is important is when you're representing the buyer and you receive a counteroffer, especially again in this market, multiple counteroffer situation, it says the same thing on the multiple counteroffer as well. Most agents are going through and they're just having their sellers sign all the counteroffers and distributing them out. Then the buyer just gets the counteroffer and they accept the offer, and then the listing agent sends the contract back to their seller to initial it and move on and officially open escrow. Well, if the seller does not initial that section of the contract, then it doesn't apply, and the liquidated damages clause doesn't apply, or the arbitration, whichever section that is missed. And so the buyer ends up accepting a contract with terms that they're not fully aware of. They don't have all of that information. And so when you represent the buyer and you get the counteroffer back, one, you can either do a buyer counteroffer if the negotiations require it and include that section just to clarify that liquidated damages and arbitration are a part of the contract. Or ask the listing agent, can we also get the signed contract back as well? Because that's an important term in the agreement that all parties should be aware of.
Oh, for sure, Lauren. And then it looks like we have a quick question from Wilma Nichols, if you see that.
Let me see here.
Yeah, she says, make sure you review the home warranty. I checked pool and spa in the RPA, however, was not included in the home warranty.
Yes, that is something that is very true as well. We see that a lot. And our TC team, we definitely cross-reference what's in the contract with what's actually been ordered on the invoice. So if you're not the one ordering the home warranty, always double check it and make sure. We cross-reference when we receive an NHD report, we double check, is that the NHD company that was agreed to in the contract? Is that the home warranty company that was agreed to? And it's really important to verify those things, because there have been situations where you get all the way, escrow closes, escrow pays the home warranty invoice, and then your client has an issue and you realize that the listing side or the escrow officer ordered the home warranty and it wasn't all the coverage that was needed or that you thought was there. So don't automatically assume that that it's going to be correct. Always double check it and verify. So that's a good point, definitely.
Yeah, thanks for that, Wilma.
Yeah, thank you. The other thing that gets missed in the counteroffers, since I have it up, is, a lot of times people just jump to all these these other terms, and 1A and 1B are really important, right? So 1A was the initialed sections. 1B clarifies in writing that unless otherwise agreed to, the down payment and loan amount get adjusted based on your sale price, but deposit amount remains unchanged from your original offer. And we see so many times that we'll get a deposit receipt from escrow and we're like, why is this so much more? Why did the buyer bring more money into escrow? And they'll say, oh, well, the sales price was higher. Or they'll say, oh, our agent told us, it's 3% deposit. So that's what we brought in. And so it's really important to understand this term, that the deposit, whatever you put in on your deposit page, unless it's been countered out as a percentage or anything like that, whatever you put on here in this section is the initial deposit. That's what should be expected to be brought into escrow. So it doesn't fluctuate based on sale price. Your loan amount, your down payment amount, those will be altered, but your initial deposit remains the same. Why is this important? This is important because it goes back to the liquidated damages. Your initial deposit becomes a part of those damages, and it becomes susceptible to those damages. And so you want to make sure that all of the funds are covered, whether it's for the seller side or the buyer side, that they get all of their funds back. Because what's in writing here is the initial deposit says 10,000, maybe your client brought in 12,000. Then you sign a cancellation that says buyer's initial deposit to be returned. Well, the initial deposit amount is for 10,000. So someone could argue, well, we get the other 2,000 because this initial deposit is in writing here that it should only be 10,000. So it creates this ambiguity. It creates this gray area. If it does happen, the recommendation is that you utilize the RID form. And this is receipt for increased deposit. And it's basically saying that this liquidated damages clause applies to this overage in the deposit. And that it now becomes this full amount. And that's always a best practice or contractually required when you do an increased deposit on purpose. But it should certainly be utilized if there is an unintentional overage for your initial deposit as well. The other thing that is also important in talking about counteroffers is to stop writing in your counteroffers any terms about a non-refundable deposit or anything that's non-refundable. In section 21, again, the second part is what is being initialed. They're initialing this liquidated damages section here, but an often overlooked section is 21A, where it does say any clause added by the parties specifying a release of deposit or making a deposit non-refundable will be deemed invalid. So really stop writing that in, because it has to independently satisfy those damages, and it typically doesn't. So you're not protecting anybody. One of my favorite sayings is the most dangerous thing in a contract is a blank space where an agent can fill anything in, because you guys love to turn into attorneys, and
Right.
it can create so much ambiguity, and that's really kind of where the danger lies. So it's already in here. You don't even have to worry about it. It will just become void anyway. So heads up on that.
Yeah, good heads up.
Yeah. The other thing in sort of relation to that involves writing in the as is clause in your counter offers. So I think everybody knows the contract already states that the property is sold in as is condition, right? And so I see all the time on counter offers, properties selling for as is, seller will not do any repairs or any changes. So where this becomes an issue involves different city requirements or county requirements, retrofit requirements. This section in the contract is written very intentionally and specifically, and applies to all of these terms and calls out the retrofit section separately. Well, when you then override that in a counter offer, are you saying including any retrofit requirements? Well, now who's responsible for those other retrofit requirements? Even though that's typically a seller item, people seem to think that it only applies to the home inspection and what gets asked for on the repair request. And that's not true. There's a lot of other elements in a transaction where the seller is responsible for certain things. Water heater strapping, is that considered a repair? Does that mean the seller is not going to strap the water heater? So again, it kind of creates this ambiguity, and it becomes dangerous for both parties involved. So it's not helping anybody by re-clarifying that. I know a lot of agents will also say, well, my client just wants to be sure. And that's where you would point out this section to them in the contract, then also reassure them with the repair request process. That is another point of negotiation, and they don't have to do anything. The buyer can ask for the repairs. They probably will. You would if you were in the other, if you were in the opposite situation. So set that expectation, prepare them, but don't let them create ambiguity in the contract and potentially harm themselves in the transaction by just writing this in blanket statement.
Right. And Andre Perez has a question. He says, first of all, what about in an amendment? And I think he was talking about, adding stuff in an amendment. And then he has a second question is, can you amend the contract to extend escrow?
Yes, so there is a form for that. It is the ETA form, the extension of time addendum. And that's where you can utilize that for extending your contingencies. You can extend the close of escrow date, and things like that. You don't necessarily need just an addendum, because again, and I think I touched on this a little bit in the last one. I'll go over it now again as well. There is an addendum form, which you can think of as adding terms, and then there is the AEA form, which is the amendment of existing agreement, which is what it sounds like. You're amending something that's already been agreed to. So if you don't want to use this extension of time addendum to extend the close of escrow, which a reason being I see a lot is that a lot of people will say, oh, we want to extend it to June 30th or sooner. And you can't really write in or sooner. So you might say like additional terms where you'll say, close of escrow or sooner or whatever. So if you don't want to use this form, you would use the AEA form. And so that you already have an agreement that close of escrow would be on a certain date or 30 days or anything like that. And so now you're amending that existing agreement to your new close of escrow date or term or anything like that. An addendum, again, would be if you're adding something. So if there's a new credit that you're agreeing to, that would go on an addendum. If there's some sort of, I don't know, any new term that you're adding to this agreement would go on that. Everything else would be on this AEA form. And then as far as, I don't know if that answered the question or not. Oh, I see it's in the chat. Okay. I was looking at the questions here. So to have the deposit be non-refundable. No, because again, it's not just isolated to the counter offers. It's just anywhere in the contract that terminology becomes invalid. So let me go back to the section here. Oops. So any clause added by the parties anywhere, and whether it's on an amendment, an addendum later on, anything like that, it becomes invalid. And so I think I am not well versed in what the specifics are to independently satisfy the liquidated damages requirements in the civil code. So I would refer you to maybe Carlegal or real estate attorney for those specifics. But in my experience and from speaking with Carlegal, their recommendation is always just don't put those terms in there because it gets voided out.
Yeah, and of course, Lauren can answer many of questions, but there are definitely questions that need to be directed to
Yes.
car legal or a real estate attorney.
Definitely. And so, you know, my experience that I'm sharing with you guys comes in, you know, from my years of experience and thousands of transactions, but also through my courses, training to be a car certified forms trainer. And so we get instruction from the car legal attorneys as well. And so that was extremely valuable and informative for me as the TC, being like, well, what about when the agent does this? And what about that? And I've seen them do this. And so a lot of this is me passing that information on from the car attorneys as well. But again, always verify if you're unsure with your broker or with the real estate attorney or car legal. Ideally, car legal when it comes to using the specifics of the car forms, because they're the ones that put it together. So yeah, so the two other items that I'll touch on here real quick are, I wanted to point out in the contract this definition section, and specifically 30F talking about the definition of days. And so this comes into effect when you're talking about calculating your days. And it's often, a lot of agents don't realize that this is clarified in the contract on days for performance and what that means. It's not really like, you know, we can just decide whatever we feel like if it should roll forward or roll backwards. It specifies that the last day for performance for any act, whether that's a contingency removal, whether that's you know, closing your escrow, does not include Saturday, Sunday, or a legal holiday, and shall instead be the next day. So it rolls forward. So if your closing date ends up being, you know, calculates out to a Saturday, you don't automatically make the closing date Friday. It should be Monday. And the same goes for contingency removals. The important thing to note, so if, for example, you have a 10-day inspection contingency removal that falls on a Saturday, the buyer has until 11:59 p.m. on Monday to remove that contingency. It gets pushed out to the following day. That is not a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. The notice to perform, those dates don't skip over the weekends. So if you have, you know, a contingency removal that's due on a Saturday, you can still send the notice to perform up to 2 days prior. So you could send it on a Thursday, and it would still cover through end of day on Monday, if that makes sense. But it's definitely something to keep in mind. I think a lot of listing agents get surprised where they're like, why do they get these extra days? And it's the calculations for those dates are literally defined in the contract. So keep that in mind as well. And again, I say 11:59 p.m. because that is defined again in days after. So you get until 11:59 p.m. on that final day. It's not 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. or whatever close of business is. It's the literal end of the day that they have for that delivery. And then the other thing that's really important to keep in mind is if your buyer is an entity, if they are a trust or they are an LLC, make sure that you're checking this representative capacity signature form or box right above their signature. The same goes for the seller. If your seller is replying or signing or accepting this offer and they are in a trust or an LLC or a probate or an entity, whatever, there's a box for that as well. It's important to notify in this section because this now ties this agreement to the contract and notifies all parties that there is a representative capacity being utilized. Otherwise, you just kind of have this floating form. It's not really tied to the contract. And then you're looking at doing an amendment to clarify who the seller is and to tie the form into that. And so just keep in mind that this box is here. When you're filling out the contract as the buyer's agent, if you check that box, it will automatically add that form to your cache of forms that are here. So then you can go in here and complete those documents.
Well, that's pretty, that's nice that you don't have to remember that. It just automatically adds it.
Exactly. But the important thing to remember too is that you still have to come back out here to your documents, select it, and go into it. A lot of times, another one that we see a lot is when the transaction is FHA. When you select that it's FHA or a VA, you're required to provide the FVAC form. And so when you check this box, it will automatically add it. But what happens is the agents go through and they fill out the contract and they're expecting it to be down at the bottom, but it's not. It's actually over here. It's been added to your documents. So you got to go out and go in here and fill out these specifics for that form. So it often gets missed. We'll see it checked in the contract and then we're looking for this document and it's not there. So make sure that you remember to go back out and fill out those specifics and include it when you're getting your offer signed.
Good points.
Otherwise, that's kind of it for me on the ins and outs of the contract. It's all going to go out the window in December, but I'm excited to come back and talk about the new one. So
oh yeah, you'll be back.
Yeah. And again, if anybody has a question on, that new contract and what that all looks like, you can find that in the same spot. They have a RPA draft of the new one that's coming out. The big 16 pager of the new purchase agreement. So
and Lauren, when did you say that? Yeah, oh yeah, as usual. When did you say that goes into effect?
The new contract?
Yeah.
December.
Okay, so we have till December, but
you have until December. They have already started. They have classes you can sign up for, webinars for it. And I'm actually really excited. I think it's going to make things so much easier. Just a quick overview, all of the terms, everything we went through, sifting through all those other pages, they've made it in the first 4 pages of the contract. That's it. These are all the terms. And then everything else is just paragraphs. So anything that you modify is all on these first 4 pages. And so it's going to make sure that you're not missing important terms that you want to address or counter or review. They're all up front. So it's going to be interesting. It also is going to directly affect or modify an additional 75 documents and disclosures. So nothing too drastic, but some forms will go away because they've been incorporated into this contract. Some are going to be shortened or modified, but it's going to be a big change. If you can get in on the webinars now, I highly recommend it, and start getting prepped. So it's gonna tweak how people do business a little bit. I certainly think so.
Yeah, no, at least looks a little bit more straightforward. Sometimes when they make changes, you're like, what the heck did they do that for? But this looks like a pretty darn good one.
Yeah. And again, when you're talking about who pays for what and terms of possession, all of this stuff is just laid out here. You just have to check a box or change the default time. Any of it, just again, it pulls all of these things into the front anywhere you need to check a box or look anything up. And it'll do that for you. So again, right away, it says, the home warranty plan, any of the coverage and stuff. Again, it's automatically just buyer's coverage. You don't have to specify that stuff in the new contract. So little things like that are going to be a big change, and it's going to be kind of crazy, but I think it's going to be helpful in the end. So I'm excited for it.
Yeah, once we all learn it, right?
Exactly. But yeah, so.
Excellent. Well, Lauren, as usual, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your insight and all of the great information that you provided for us.
Pleasure.
Yeah, and so anybody that needs to utilize Lauren's services, of course, her contact information it's now on our Agent Resource Center, and you can download that form and have access to all the contacts within Alta Realty Group. But her contact information is on the webinar invite that you guys received today and yesterday, and it'll be on the replay when I send that out later today. So don't hesitate to use her services. And Cameron, thanks so much for joining us as well. We always appreciate your insight into mortgage land. And I look forward to seeing all of you guys on the next webinar. So get out there, make it a great week and a productive week, and we will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.